Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We will be getting started shortly. Oops. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the session called The Teen Years. My name is Tom Hughes, and I'll be the moderator for this evening. I'm a member of the Rotary Club of Golden, one of the sponsors of tonight's event. I'm most pleased to introduce today's speaker, Jamie Haskell. Jamie is a licensed professional counselor. His career has been mostly spent working with both adults and juveniles that are experiencing mental health symptoms and that have been mixed up in the criminal justice system. He has provided court-appointed assessments as well as ongoing treatment in detention. His passions are to be outdoors and active no matter what the season. Today, Jamie will be talking about ways to manage both respect for your teen's search for identity and the increased need for independence with appropriate rules and limit setting. As a reminder, today's presentation, along with all the presentations from the conference, will be available on demand after the live session for the next 30 days. Now, before I hand the mic over to Jamie, I have a few housekeeping items to cover about the presentation and the Helping Kids Thrive conference. First, I'd like to thank our sponsors and partners who have helped make this event possible today. It is a true community effort to put this together. Thank you to Jeffco Public Schools, Rotary Club of Golden, Delta Dental, Westminster Medical Clinic, Source Communication, and the Jeffco PTA for your support. Next, we'd love to hear from you, the attendees, during today's presentation. If you have a question for our speaker, please feel free to send it through the Q&A tab at the right-hand side of the screen. We'll be answering questions at the end of the session. If we don't get to your question, or if you'd like to ask additional questions, we encourage you to attend the Q&A sessions with our speakers from 8:30 to 9 tonight. Now, live Spanish translation service is available for this presentation. Look on your chat box to see a phone number and a Zoom meeting ID. That will get you to a Spanish language version of the presentation. If you're having technical difficulties, email us at webmaster@jcmh.org. webmaster@jcmh.org. And finally, at the end of the presentation, please fill out this session evaluation by clicking on the link that I'll be putting up in this chat box. Your feedback is very important. It helps us plan for future conferences. So without any further ado, I'd like to kick things off by welcoming Jamie Haskell. Jamie, over to you.
Thank you, Tom. All right, I believe you should be able to see my PowerPoint. Is that correct, Tom?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. So yeah, teenage years. Talking about the teenagers. So my plan is to have about 15 or 20 minutes at the end of this presentation to be able to at least field questions. So yeah, feel free to put those into the chat box, and Tom can get to those near the end there. So teenage years, I really want to just highlight this evening's agenda, some of the topics that I wanted to highlight through this discussion, and move on. So who we may be. So we may be a lot of different references, a lot of different labels. We may be parents, we may call ourselves guardians, we may be biological parents, we may be adoptive parents, we may be fostering a child or a teenager, we may be a kinship placement. So I think there's a lot of different styles of families to be set up, a lot of different dynamics of what it's going to look like and who you may be raising. The opening, I want to really start out with a mindset. You know, I've found this quote before: speak to your children as if they are the wisest, kindest, most beautiful and magical humans on the earth, for what they believe is what they will become. You know, I want to start out on really where probably what you didn't expect is looking at the parents, looking at us. That's where I want to start out when we start that relationship with our teenagers. So before we get to the teenager part, I really want to begin with us. So being able to talk with your kids, you got to know yourself, and especially when you're setting up rules, thresholds, expectations. What do we expect out of ourselves, and what do you know about yourself? Okay, we need to be able to find the insight of what we do, who we are, how we behave, We need to know what grinds our gears. We need to know what gets underneath our skin and drives us bonkers pretty much. Okay. These are important things that we need to know in order to be able to work with other individuals. Knowing your default parenting techniques. So usually this is defined by how you grew up, who raised you, how did they implement rules, how did they determine what was fair, balanced, what was going to be the law and order, how do they behave in certain situations. We as individuals tend to pick up those techniques from who raised us. We may also pick them up from education, things that we've read, books that we've read, people we've talked to, friends that we lean on, and find guidance through their years of their own parenting. So what are we going to basically end up doing in a somewhat natural setting, and somewhat unconsciously? We need to know your values. If we don't know what is important, where are we going to draw the line? What is expected, and there is no discussion on compromising or negotiation? What are those rules going to be? And then also, where are some other things that we could bend and compromise and learn how to negotiate with our children, especially the teenagers? We need to know what's important to you on those aspects. One aspect that I think that working with families is going through the grieving process and recognizing that relationships are always changing. We as individuals are changing, therefore our relationships with somebody else is always changing. Sometimes we do long for the days of when our kid was 4 and 5 and they, were super cute and adorable and they never said anything bad against us and they never talked back. And to be able to, grieve those moments of happiness through the teenage years where it sometimes can be very chaotic. So being able to recognize that there is sometimes a grieving process to that relationship that's changing. And then also recognizing just in the fact, how can we expect something out of our teenage youth to be so certain on how to behave and control their emotions if we haven't necessarily done that work ourselves and become more of a master in our own regard. We need to, set up that modeling and set up that expectation that, hey, we're doing it ourselves, and maybe I'm not perfect. That's okay, but I'm working on it, and really trying to display that. We also want to start out with grasping and understanding of what is age appropriateness. What are things that we're going to expect to see out of our teenagers? We're going to expect to see the boundary testing, the pushing the limits, the defiance and questioning of when we set a rule. Well, why is that the rule? Why is that the standard? Why do I have to follow that? That doesn't seem reasonable. Whatever their pushback is, some of this really is, we got to look at what is age appropriateness, because we also don't want to necessarily fully, we don't want to chastise and punish in a long accord to what may be age appropriate. During these times, our children are going to be somewhat pulling away from the family. Ages, that teenage years, they're not going to be as family oriented and centric. So how do we adjust to that? So that they may be isolating, they may be pulling away and spending more time with friends. We may or may not approve of some of their friends. How do you deal with those type of situations? Their styles may be changing from time to time. As our children and teenagers are growing, they're trying to learn their own identity. They're trying to figure out who they are as an individual and where are they going to go with their life. That may change very often throughout the teenage years. So being able to understand that type of stuff. Emotional instability, and in a teenager is inability to be able to monitor and regulate their own emotions. Once again, pretty normal. Sometimes due to the hormonal changes, the puberty that is going on may increase the impulsivity and risk-taking. Sometimes inappropriate behaviors as well, depending on what type of situations our children are getting into. There may be call for, they may get wrapped up in the criminal justice system. They might get a ticket. They might have the school, their eyes on them. So being able to monitor some of this, obviously not appropriate, but we do have to expect that there's going to be times that our children are probably going to make some poor decisions. One thing I really wanted to highlight is the danger zone of comparing our teenager to an adult. Some of our teenagers may be as large as adults. They may even be larger than us by the time they get to 13 or 14. Based on your genetic background, they might just tower over you. But being able to consider that physically they may be much larger, but in reality, we need to be able to treat them where their developmental stage is regarding their brain and what they're capable of. All right, that's kind of looking funky on my side there. Looks like some of it's overlapping. I don't know if that's the same on your guys' end. So, I did want to highlight some of the things within the age appropriateness. We're not necessarily going to talk a bunch about this. I think there's a lot of presentations that kind of emphasize this to a large degree, but at least in my eyes, it doesn't necessarily tell us how to work with that group. I want to talk a little bit more tonight about certain skills, certain things that we need to focus on, and then going into some tools and recommendations and what might be valuable for you to take home and continue learning about. But some of these things I do think are important because we have to gain and grasp the mindset of these teenagers in these different groups. So, looking at that top group, 11 to 14, we are working with a concrete thinker. We are working with somebody who is really looking at what's good versus bad, and what is right versus wrong. These individuals and teenagers in general, they tend to see themselves as the center of attention. So the fact that a 12-year-old might have a pimple on their face is absolutely blown out of proportion, that it is the end of the world to them. That self-consciousness kicks in, and now everyone's going to be speaking about them if they go out in the public. So it's painfully clear on understanding that a teenager may blow those type of situations out of proportion, and we need to be able to deal with that in certain ways and certain techniques in class. 11 to 14-year-olds are struggling on that future orientation, planning ahead. What does it mean that if I do something today, what's the consequence for tomorrow? Being able to help guide them through those situations and not necessarily expecting that they're always going to make that proper, right decision. Then ongoing adolescence, you really want to focus on the fact that adolescence goes until the mid-20s. The human brain isn't fully grown and developed until somebody's 24, 25, 26 in that pocket of time, meaning that some of our children may even go away to college and graduate without necessarily having their brain fully developed. Some kids, they might have a master's degree by the time they're 25, and yet they're just now fully getting developed. So we always want to remember that capacity of these individuals are always growing. That last brain piece really coming into development is that executive functioning development, where they're making the as they grow better and better decisions. But right now they're just not there yet. They need that practice, they need that guidance, they need ongoing development to be able to make better and better decisions. but they are in a pocket late teenage years to be able to grasp the, if I make a decision today, it can affect me tomorrow, and what does it look like down the road? Once again, they're still practicing, they're still being able to decipher better decisions through experience and training, but nonetheless, they're more capable to recognize if I do something today, what's it going to turn out for tomorrow, either positive or negative there. So internal versus external. So I really wanted to focus this this piece for a few different things. One of them being goal setting. So what we may recognize within teenagers and what they're growing with as they go through adolescence is typically we tend to see goal setting as more external. So a young teenager might go to school because that's what mom and dad wants me to do. That's what society wants me to do. I may behave because I don't want to get into trouble with the police. I may do something because of such and such, and it's external. It's outside of that individual. It's outside of that teenager. A lot of their reasons can be attributed to an external locus of goal setting. As we age, we do really want to get individuals learning more of the internal locus of goal setting. So why are they behaving in certain ways that are a little bit more focused on, for them, their own reasons? I'm going to school to learn more subjects, to be able to get smarter, to then go on to maybe college because I really want to do something that that profession requires a college degree. And really trying to move that to an internal locus goal setting. At the beginning, there's nothing wrong with external, and even later on in years and adulthood, certainly there's going to be certain things in our life that are externally motivated to us. But arguably, the challenge I always give that if we're living our life always for our parents, then unfortunately, and reality wise, I mean, parents, typically die off before their children. So if that parent is no longer around, who are we living our life for? So really being able to teach our children that internal locus of goal setting. Why are they doing certain things for their own good and their own reason? So being able to monitor that through those adolescent years, and maybe, and trying to get it from the spectrum of external over to a little bit more internal for their own reasons. This is also another piece for internal versus external based off of blaming somebody. So when situations go wrong, or even maybe situations go right, but let's focus on the negative piece right there for a second. If something happens based off of I got into trouble because somebody told on me. I got grounded because my parents found out. And if we add reasons to an issue or an event that unraveled and it was all external, once again, it's that the locus of control in the situation, behaviors. What is the issue with that? Obviously, if it's all external, then technically we go along for the ride. We are a victim of the external situations. Technically, by that definition, people are thinking, I have no control over that situation. Okay. Once again, once we start getting the individual to learn that they have a locus of control internally and their own selves, and they play a piece into being able to let things play out in their own manner. So if it's no longer I got in trouble because my parents found out, it's I got in trouble because I did something I wasn't supposed to do, and then my parents found out. Being able to allow our children to be able to grasp this concept that they play a large part in what a lot of things they do. And I think it's a little bit more easier to put an example for a negative side, but on the positive side is, that internal locus control is I studied my butt off to be able to do really well on my final exam and get a good grade. That wasn't due to just chance and luck. Um, Being able to put forth the example to our children that they play a large piece in what's going on in their life. Therefore, they have a lot of control to make things better. They have a lot of control to make things good in their life rather than feeling like they're getting their butt bit by a whole bunch of factors of why they don't have control over it. Another thing I really wanted to highlight is when we work with families and children, how we try to be able to assess where they are. One thing that we use is the motivational interviewing stages of change. So if you all haven't heard of motivational interviewing, I would highly recommend for you to look it up, read some articles, read some books on it. It is definitely a popular psychotherapy type model and paradigm that we use, but I think there's a lot of things that are very useful to parents, and at least in my program, working with adolescents 15, actually up to 30, we do a lot of training with our parents regarding certain topics of motivational interviewing. One of the great topics of it and points out is from motivational interviewing is really roll with resistance, meaning that if what we're fighting about and what we're talking about continues just to build resistance, then we've got to figure out how to get beyond that. So if we're trying to challenge our child about a topic that we're want to talk about, and it just amps them up, and they're defensive, and they just keep on pushing back, we do have to learn at a certain point in the threshold of when do we kind of shy away from that? When do we say, okay, maybe today's not the day to talk about this? Doesn't mean I'm forgetting about this. Doesn't mean that I'm not going to bring this up again. But how do we not have resistance with resistance? It's not going to go very far with working with our children and working with therapy in general. But some of the highlights of the stages of change is that we need to figure out where is this individual in their perspective of what's going on. So when we're looking at a certain issue, we can use drug use for this. So if somebody's in that pre-contemplative state, to them there is no issue. Them using substances, it's for them it works. It only helps them out. It's all positives for them. So really there's no issue. But when mom and dad say, oh no, there is an issue, you shouldn't be using drugs at the age of 15, or their probation officer might be saying the same, or teachers are teaching them all this, but to them there is no issue. So they're going to use as much as they want because there is no issue. They're in that pre-contemplative stage. So we need to be able to work with them in a certain manner to be able to get them to the side of understanding, why is this an issue? Is there an issue at all? And being able to try to help them to determine at what capacity is there an issue in what we're talking about. That contemplative stage is really looking at the individual might say, well, I'm not quite certain there is a full-on issue. I don't know if there is a problem, but there's definitely, what's going on in my life, it's not the way I want to live my life. So you're starting to contemplate, maybe there needs to be a change. I'm not quite certain yet, but maybe there needs to be a change. And you're starting to challenge that type of thought pattern and that thought process, being able to invoke conversation on a possible issue. So that might be an example of somebody in a contemplative state. Once they get to that planning state, they've already recognized, okay, there is an issue. I may not want to change it, but there is an issue. I got to make some changes. And I'm starting to plan towards a different lifestyle, and I'm starting to plan towards some changes. And maybe maybe their planning is, well, I can't use it at 15, but when I get legal at 21, maybe I'll use it. So at least for the next 6 years, I'm going to take a break. That action phase is them actually implementing their plan that they've designed, and actually trying to live it out, and make changes to anything that they might make changes to as far as their planning goes. And then maintenance is the ongoing maintenance of their new behavior. And we tend to see, people and individuals go in and out of these phases back and forth all the time. But being able to decipher some of those categories and where an individual might be at any given moment allows us to be able to plan accordingly what our counteracting would be and what our interventions may be in that particular situation. I also wanted to highlight the term consequences. So when we look at consequences and rules and expectations, usually when we say the term consequences, we tend to naturally think of negative. But I really want individuals to think about consequences can be both negative and positive. Okay, so if we study our butt off and do well on a test, and we get a good grade for that class, that's a positive consequence. That's something we did. That's something that we earned. That's something that we got. Just as much as if we didn't study at all, we failed the exam, and now we got an F in the class, that's a negative consequence, right? So I want to be able to focus that it's going to take both positive and negative consequences to be able to offer to our children the guidance and expectation that they're going to set up good behaviors, good habits, and be able to behave in an according way that we're trying to raise them towards. And research really shows positive reinforcement is one of the best ways, if not the best way, to be able to help train a kid, if you will, on doing better than what they should be. Okay, so really highlighting that that consequential sequence from any given behavior, they behave in a proper way, they're going to get a positive consequence. They behave in a negative way, they may get a negative consequence. So being able to focus on that reality. Through the teenage years, we're really growing out of that timeout phase where, timeouts aren't going to work the same as they did as a 3 to 7 year old here. But also recognizing that timeouts, although maybe not a punishment or a consequence or even a redirect in its own accord, timeouts might be just beneficial in order to be able to allow people to calm down and kind of come down from a heightened emotional state. So really being able to, maybe we're not using timeouts the same way as we did when our child was younger, but being able to not forget that maybe a timeout is appropriate. It's just not used in the necessarily same way. During the years of poor decision making in teenage, second chances aren't necessarily uncalled for here. So being able to recognize when can we use that? When can we redirect with a second chance? Children and teenagers, they might need to be told quite a few times in order to grasp what's going on. So that verbal instruction and trying to learn what is the best method for my own child to be able to learn some of the things that I want them to learn. Really being clear with communication and establishing clear rules. What is it down to the T, and a definition, and discussing with your child that this is what I mean by this terminology, and this is what I mean by this rule, and really making it clear and cut and dry, black and white with these type of discussions with our children to make sure that they get it. We may have to set limits and withhold privileges, and depending on what our children may have, that might be something that we have to reevaluate. Are they responsible enough or mature enough to hold the privilege that they're currently holding? So sometimes we need to make those adjustments based off of some of the behaviors and what we're seeing from our children. We need to figure out what's fair and reasonable. We don't want to be grounding for 6 months for being 5 minutes late past curfew. That might be seen as very unfair and reasonable. Same thing as a reward. We don't want to be paying $5,000 for a good fall semester in ninth grade. We're not going to be able to sustain those. They're not fair. They're not reasonable. We have to figure out what's going to be the best for our children for that motivational factor. Not forgetting about natural consequences. I personally feel and professionally feel, working with families, that the natural consequence has lately, it almost feels like it's gone out the window. So being able to focus that we need to figure out when can we let our children fail at something? When is it safe for them to learn that failure moment and be able to drive their own motivation? If they have a bad taste in their mouth based off of what has happened due to a natural consequence, that could be that changing moment. We can tell them 100 different times and they never listen to us. But that moment that they actually do what they did and get that natural consequence could be that changing moment and what they needed to be able to learn from it. Obviously, we have to take in accordance with this of safety, risk, and security. If somebody is suicidal, they are threatening to harm themselves, they have the means to do it. That's not something that we want for their natural consequence to have. We need to step in. We need to align with them and be able to help them out in that moment. This natural consequences, we're really talking about the smaller things of what's something that if they stumble, trip, and fall, they're going to be okay. And they're actually probably going to learn a better lesson from it rather than us jumping in to rescue and having that unintended consequence of maybe they're going to feel like they're going to be rescued each and every time. And they're no longer learning from that moment, if you will. And then also, I really wanted to highlight the fact that, families with multiple kids, each kid does not have to have the same exact consequence. Each kid is different, even though they grow up in the same family. So being able to decipher what's best for Tommy versus what's best for Sally. It's okay to have different rules, different situations, different consequences, because kids are going to be different, even though they grow up in the same unit. So communication and setting up the basis of what do we do. My undergrad at Florida State, one of my psychology professors, Dr. Barato, had a lot of different sayings that had lived with me through not only life but through therapy. But one of the things that I always remember him saying was, "It doesn't matter what you say; it only matters what the other person hears." So really, we're looking at that fact of that loss in translation. So whenever we have a discussion with somebody else, no matter how close we are to them, we may be using words that we define personally that other person defines in a different way. So right away, right there, when we instruct and when we have particular conversations, we have to recognize the reality that some of that may be lost, and we need to break it down. We need to go back to revisit. We need to use skills such as, I hear you saying this. This is what I'm internalizing and interpreting. We need to be able to be much more closer on the same page in order to be with our children, and have them, going back to the clear clear expectation and the rules of, are they going to grasp it based off of one time saying it, or not having them repeat exactly what I'm saying or the way they internalize it, to make sure that they're grasping what we're talking about here, so that we're setting up that threshold, that boundary, and that expectation that, all right, we're on the same page here. So there shouldn't be any confusions, right? So that it's not a week later and said, "Oh, I thought you meant this by saying that." No, that's not what we talked about. That's trying to head that off right away and earlier on in that conversation rather than having that come on down the road. Also, there may be a lot of conversations that we as parents need to initiate if our children are not initiating. There's a lot of hard topics out there. There's a lot of important topics out there that need to be educated and discussed. And we certainly don't want our children to be able to learn these topics from the wrong people or somebody who's misinforming them. We want to be able to empower our children and make sure that they have the tools, the knowledge, and the guidance in order to become successful and productive adults when they grow up. Just glancing over here. And we certainly don't have to go into detail on these. I think that there's a few topics we'll actually come back to later on in this presentation and look at. Communication going on. So assertiveness, that's another one of those skills that we're trying to teach our children. And remember, knowledge is not innate. We are not born with knowledge. So being able to figure out how do we teach our children as much as we can in the proper ways that we can. And assertiveness is one of those things that a lot of times we don't see a full-on assertive individual till maybe their 20s. At least it tends to see in my experience. If we can teach this type of skill earlier on, we're really putting our children at an advantage here. The assertiveness, trying to get your point across and trying to attain something, maybe even sometimes a goal, in a respectful manner that you're not taking advantage of the other individual. So, we can see this even with, younger kids of, if a 6-year-old tells you, give me one of those cookies, I think a lot of parents would say, no, that's not how we behave. That's not how we ask for that. We're trying to teach our kids, what would be a better method on being able to obtain that cookie that you want in a healthy manner that is also respectful. Being able to train that right through the more complicated years of teenage years, where they are away from our house a lot more often. We're not, around our teenagers' life as much as we are with that 4 or 5 or 6-year-old. So being able to teach them that self-confidence and ability to be able to attain what they want to attain in their life, whether it's from teachers or staff, or maybe they're even starting a job and maybe they're starting to work during this period of time when they're 15, 16, 17. Being able to teach them those moments and what might be very valuable on a huge social skill within their life. Remembering that with their communication, teenagers are still trying to grasp their own insight and how to communicate effectively through their teenage years. They might be experiencing things within their life that they might not have the particular word or the vocabulary to be able to express what's going on. They might not also truly fully understand what's going on with their hormones and what's going on with their emotions and why they're so up and down on any particular day. So being able to help our teenagers through these type of situations, and really try to understand where they're coming from is going to help us be able to interact with them better, and decide on what's more appropriate on what we need to do in a certain situation. Western society arguably doesn't do a fantastic job on teaching our kids the emotions, how to describe it, how to express your emotions in a proper way. We don't do well as culturally as grieving teachers. So, we need to do a better job. We need to be able to make sure our kids are learning in appropriate ways. It's also something that isn't abundance in school as far as them learning these topics. So, that comes to us as the teachers and parents of our children. That's also going to help us out on being able to have our children grow into adults that are a little bit more in touch with their emotions. And then also with support, what does it mean to communicate as we are support? So if we go back to the individual who doesn't allow their child to have a very minor natural consequence, if we're expressing and displaying ourselves as a support, communication is much more than verbalness. Communication is much more behavioral. So what are we doing? How does the body react that is much more different than what that person is saying? So that person may be saying, I want you to learn a tough lesson, but their actions are saying, well, I'm jumping in to rescue you. So that's going to be much more powerful. So we do have to recognize, what are we doing within the communication of being able to, what are we saying with our actions? So we do have to understand, what does it mean to be a support? What does it mean to enable somebody? Supportive behaviors can be, I'm helping somebody out with a situation or an event that I know they don't have the skills. They are not capable of doing this on their own. So I'm going to support them rather than enabling and helping your 17-year-old tie their own shoes, but they've been tying their shoes since they were 5, and you've been doing it the whole time. We're not supportive in that situation. We're enabling in that situation. We need to determine, where could we be supports with our teenagers, because they're much more capable nowadays, but they're not fully capable. And where are we enabling? Where do we need to cut off and be able to trust that they're going to follow through and do that by themselves? Focusing on the relationship matters. The relationship is crucial on how we interact and how our children are going to behave with us. As we already talked about, the relationship is always changing. As we as individuals change, the relationship is always changing. So how do we adjust to that type of stuff? How do we adjust to the fact that our kids don't behave in the same ways, because naturally they're older, they have more talents, they're more capable of doing things. So how do we adjust to that type of stuff? One thing that we really need to focus on as well is that we need to rebuild that relationship as it's going, as it's changing. We have to always go back to what's going to be beneficial to that relationship. How do we get to know our child as they age again? How do they get to know us as we age and as we change? And what might be going on in your life truly matters and is still allowing you to grow as a human. So how is your child going to be able to get to know that? We need to find those times of connectivity, and what's going to be valuable in those moments is that relationship is building when we figure out, once a month, maybe we're doing a kind of a date night with our own child, where we just, phones are gone, technology is gone. I'm going to go out for a handful of hours with my child and just get to spend time with them. We're going to, really forget about that whole dynamic of being the parent versus child, where we're going to build that relationship with them and learn with them as things grow. Those type of moments are hugely important to be able to foster and rekindle that relationship, to then also go back to when it is time to discipline a child and face consequences. It is a little bit more responsive to for that child to have that relationship there, and also to help your child with any sort of goals and changes and things that they want to do with their life. The support's going to be even more strong with that relationship in a good manner. The relationship's also going to I think is really going to be seen in the conflicts that we deal with our children. And the one thing highlighted on this slide: participating in a small battle today and entering into a large war down the road. Our life is going to be filled with conflict, and conflict is okay. There's nothing wrong with conflict. Conflict is natural. When a family comes to me and they say, "Oh, we haven't had conflict in years," then my first question is, okay, who's not talking? Who's not raising their voice? Who is not being honest and open? Because I would fully expect families to have conflict. If you're close enough with anybody, you have conflict. There's nothing wrong with that. We want to see conflict. It's what you do with that conflict is either going to be the benefit or the chaos and just the downfall of that relationship. So if we have a good relationship, we're able to enter into conflict more often. We're able to get through conflict and resolve conflict and put it behind us in a much better fashion. So the building that relationship and being able to deal with conflict when it arises, rather than brushing it under the rug and hoping it goes away. That's really what I'm saying with that type of statement, is that participating in a small conflict today, if we ignore that conflict's only going to grow down the road. And it may, depending on when we arise, I mean, if we're waiting until tomorrow, okay, it hasn't probably grown much at all. But it could be a topic of conflict that we may repress that and ignore it for years. And down the road, if we really want to tackle that conflict at that point in time, we may be too late. That may be a war for a conflict that we may not be able to win. So being able to handle those conflicts as they arise and as they come up is going to be a much more healthier way, not only for your relationship, but also the modeling piece of being able to address these type of things with your kids, that they're learning on how to properly conflict resolve and learn that skill for when they get into adulthood, or even the later teenage years when they're with friends. I mean, how many times do friends fight? I mean, if you have any teenagers coming home and saying, I got into another fight with my friends, it's, that I think that's a very frequent type occurrence. So being able to teach them those proper skills from the get-go is also going to be much more helpful with their setting their own boundaries, having them be assertive, and having them really foster that type of mentality. So with the communication and the relationship, really trying to focus on that type of stuff. Once we learn how to break down some of those things, I think that's when we can get into the tools of what do we do? How do we engage? How do we resolve some of this conflict? So for the next two slides, we have a few handful of subjects that I'll certainly go through and kind of emphasize some of the things that we would suggest or recommend to families that might be struggling to learn new skills. Using I statements. So I don't know if you all have heard of this one, but it tends to be fairly popular nowadays. But if you haven't heard about it, it's really trying to address a conversation without putting blame on the other individual, if you will. So an example of an I statement would be, hey, if you call me a rude name one more time, I'm going to send you straight to bed. That would be the opposite of an I statement. But fixing that up and making it tidy with an I statement would be, I feel very sad when I hear rude words because they hurt my feelings. I like playing with people who use nice words. So it's really eliminating the individual from the statement, because you're trying to reflect that it doesn't matter if it's your teenager or your sister or your mother. Those type of behaviors kind of grind your gears. Those are the things that get you. So being able to express that you're a little bit more angry at the behavior and the action, and trying to teach that individual that it's not necessarily fully on them. So I think it also gives guidance to somebody who, if they don't want to raise into a conflict with their parent, they actually have now a little bit more of a guidance on how to find a remedy and a resolution to what has just gone on. Being able to focus on during the teenage years and the puberty changes, the self-consciousness through our teenagers, humor. I think a lot of us use it, and I am full on guilty of that. I use a lot of humor and sarcasm in my life. But when we're working with individuals that are highly self-conscious, we got to eliminate those type of things that are really focused on some of the things that they don't have control over. So some of the puberty changes and things that are going on in their life. For us to use humor in those type of situation, or teasing, or playing around, could be pretty detrimental to the cognitive makeup of our child and how they see themselves and their self-esteem. So we do have to keep that in focus. Listening. We need to be good role models on listening. We might be in situations where we just want to wring the neck of our child because what they did. But at the same moment, we also, a lot of times, have to better understand what is going on in that process, better understanding what might have been the trajectory of why they made it such a decision. Sometimes we have to sit down and listen to them. We need to be able to hear their perspective. We need to be able to give that ability to demonstrate that and model that. We're also building trust in that moment, where we're really setting up a therapeutic environment where, all right, we're not very happy with what has gone on, but we're also we're dedicated to be able to get through these moments, to find a better way, put this behind us, and move on. A lot of times that comes with listening. Designing of fair fighting rules. So these are, this tends to be an exercise we do a lot with our families, where we're trying to decide, when you do get into conflict and when you do get into a fight, what are some good fair fighting rules? What are some things that everyone is willing to compromise to abide by? Some of those things might, no name calling, no foul language, that we're treating everybody with respect, that we're hearing the other individual out. We're not talking over each other. We're trying our best not to raise our voice. We're really trying to set up these expectations that when we go into conflict and battle, if you will, that we're following rules even in those moments, that we're trying to commit to finding a better resolution on the other side, rather than just using this as every time we get together in a conflict, we raise our voices, we lose our tempers, and nothing ever gets resolved. We need to figure out ways that are common ground, that everyone's willing to abide by, to get through those moments. Learning to compromise. When we're dealing with a 6-year-old, we might have a little bit more of a law enforcement mentality, that what we say that's just the rule. If we're using that as the expectation with a 16, 17, 18-year-old, we're going to cause a lot of issues. So being able to, once again, go back to that, the values, the hard line things. Where are we willing to not compromise at all? That is the expectation, and there is there's no difference from where that's going to be, and recognizing where some other things are that we're able to compromise. We might not want it to be this way, but we're able to live with it, and it's going to reduce conflict because we're finding a common ground here. We have to realize that our children are forming their own identity, so they may have difference of opinions. They may have a difference of opinion for political agendas and whatever they're involved with. So we have to really learn that as our child is growing and learning who they are going to be, that may in general just raise conflict and clashes with us, and we need to figure out where's going to be a common ground if we want to maintain this relationship and be able to continue communicating with each other. Choosing your battles, there's certainly going to be enough of them, so being able to decipher which ones am I going to fight this one out, and where is it we need to set this is the expectation, this is what we would like to see you do, but we understand that we may agree to disagree upon. I think that it also increases the time period of allowing your child to make decisions and learn how to make their own decisions. We need to be able to train that when they're younger. If we wait until they're 18, whether a legal adult, and I use that term loosely because how many kids at 18, let alone 23, let alone 27, are full-fledged, able to take care of themselves. I think you get better as you age, but there's still things that you're missing. So, being able to help train that earlier on and not waiting until the last moment that they're 17 and 9 months, and then, you can start making your own decisions because in less than 90 days, you're turning 18. We need to start that younger and figuring out where can we allow for that to happen and what sort of topics. How do we offer them a little bit more freedom and independency during those times, and how do we train that in a proper way? Letting them fail, natural consequences. I think it's nowadays it's if you hear of coddling society or whatever type of language along those lines, it's I think there are certain things that we do that are they don't necessarily need to be that way. Sometimes it does take the hard way to learn a certain situation and learn from a certain situation rather than being rescued. Use parents. Excuse me, finding your own supports. This is tough to do by yourself. So who are you leaning on? Who are you clearing your mind with? Who are you kind of tossing off ideas? Hey, Tommy really did this and I'm not quite certain what to do. Like, who are you leaning on that you can really rely on and cope with to get through a lot of hard, frustrating times throughout the years of being a parent? And I think that's just natural. All parents go through that. So being able to figure out what's your support system, how do you take the time for yourself? How do you find what you need to be able to be the best parent that you want to be for your child and to be there rather than feeling burnt out or feeling like it's just not going well. Respite is appropriate. So taking a step back, if you're lucky enough, if you have family members or really close friends that can take your child for even a few hours every so often, being able to take that moment for your own time and take a breather, what's it going to do to recharge your own batteries? The airplane mask, I really think is a highlighted self-care technique that I think is used a lot in counseling and psychology but I think it's a great analogy for how are you going to take care of yourself, and really it's focused on when you fly in an airplane and they're going through the safety protocols of if and when the oxygen mask comes down from the ceiling, and if you're traveling with somebody who needs help, who do you put the oxygen mask on first? And they always tell you to save yourself. You got to put that oxygen mask on yourself before you then help somebody who may not be able to do it themselves. And really focusing on, if you don't recharge your own batteries, if you don't take care of yourself, what type of support will you be to somebody else? In that moment of an airplane decompressing and oxygen going out the cabin, if you pass out trying to save that other individual without saving yourself first, now you can't be a support to them. You have to focus on yourself sometimes, and being able to self-regulate that and find that delicate balance and delicate dance that you're going to need to take on recognizing the insight of your own self on, what, I need a night off. Like, if somebody, if I have somebody lucky enough that I can have help support me, this is going to be very valuable for me to be able to recharge myself here. Recognizing that privacy is important. Teenage years, the teenagers start isolating very naturally. That's just part of who they are. It's part of what they're doing. They're kind of branching away from the family unit, so they're not always as closely knit as they were when they're younger. So being able to provide privacy to your teenager is going to be pretty essential. being able to check in, communicate, and monitor that relationship. Maybe they're isolating from what I suspect is too much. So check it in. Hey, I've noticed for the past month or two, we've barely seen you at all. Like, what's going on? Let's check in. If your child is telling you, you know what, I got that new game and I'm really doing a lot of playing on that, and I do my homework when I get home from school, and they give you kind of good reasons that are suitable, then it's okay. I'm going to trust that. They may be lying through their teeth, but I need to trust that. You need to set up that respect and trust. So allowing them to take that time, allowing them to have their privacy moments. And plus, through the teenage years, most of the parents are probably an embarrassment to most of the teenagers anyways. So, it's somewhat of a natural type situation and age appropriateness that we do have to rely on being reality. Taking a genuine interest and staying involved in your child's life. So what hobbies, what interests are they involved in? Might that be something that if you are doing a date night with your child, once a month or once every so often, that maybe that's, to get them bought into it, we're doing something that they really want to do that allows me to learn more about them and their interests and what they're good at, finding their strengths and recognizing that, they're probably talented at a lot of different things. And as they isolate from the family unit, they might be picking up new talents that we don't even know necessarily exist. So, once again, learning how to rekindle that relationship with your ever-growing child. Being consistent, and it's kind of hard to see down there, but being consistent, that it's not a guessing game on the consequences that we're picking for our children. We're able to set up a more expected environment and consequential environment for our children, so they know that if certain things happen, that either it's a good consequence, and I can improve my self-confidence and my self-esteem because I feel better about myself and I feel accomplished, versus something that is on the other side of a negative consequence based off of one of their behaviors that they do. Setting reasonable limits are definitely hugely important. Adapting. So plans in life, as I'm sure you all are certain through life experience, plans do change. So plans, rules, consequences can all change based off of new information that is incorporated into what you already know. And realistically, I would expect adaptation to certain situations and being able to change what's going on. Adapting is also when our children are learning and picking up skills and certain things that we were supporting them with because they're incapable of doing, but through time, teaching, practice, and experience, they know how to do it now. So our adaptation is, well, I'm going to now actually let you do that on your own because I expect that you have the confidence and ability to do it. And I'm going to help support you in other ways that you're trying to learn and grow through. Following through with the enforcement of consequences. Nothing worse than a parent that says, stop doing it, stop doing it, stop doing it. I'm going to take it away. And then you take it away and they cry, and then you give it right back to them and say, well, next time you do it, I'm going to take it away from you. Because you're really only teaching them, I whine and moan and I get my own way. So really being able to set that law expectation that if we design a consequence and if it's fair and reasonable, you better believe that it's being followed through because it's what's needed. And being able to be pretty strong on those type of moments. Defining role expectations, I feel, is maybe something that conversation-wise also is lacking in the experiences that I get with family is that it's appropriate to give structure and chores and expectations and define, where does my child play into the family? Where do I play into it? Where does each one of our family members play into what we do as a family unit? Being able to devote time to dedicate to that, I feel like is hugely important to be able to keep that relationship going strong. And then we also have clear expectations of what is identified, of how do we pull together as a family to keep the family going and what needs to be done. So, being able to give expectations and responsibilities, being able to then, roll that into when they are at an age that they might want to get a job and be able to put money in their pocket. They may be 16, but you know what? Great for you. I'm glad that you're getting the experience and responsibility of going out there and earning money for yourself. And then maybe getting to decide where you spend that money. But you still have roles and responsibilities. What are they? How do we define them? Maybe we take a few away because, yeah, you're doing something else. We can disperse those responsibilities elsewhere, but you still have some, core responsibilities to maintain and be part of the family unit. Negotiating versus dictating, going back to we're going to have to learn how to compromise, and we need to learn what we're willing to compromise on. And setting that up. Safety planning. We talk a lot about it in therapy on safety planning, and I kind of unfortunately feel like it's more of a punishment to talk about safety planning. But I really think that safety planning is a highly used skill that needs to be taught on to children to better look at the landscape of what's going on. So, I mean, for example, if safety planning for me, if I go up to the mountains and it's in the middle of January and it's supposed to snow 1.5 feet, I'm already safety planning. Am I, how are my tires? Do they have good enough tread? Do I need chains? Do I have extra gas? Do I have a blanket? Is my phone charged? Should I take a route that has best reception in case my car does break down? You're game planning. You're thinking through a certain situation and a possible barrier for resolution, so that barrier is not an issue anymore. That's something we need to be teaching our children and teenagers, to be able to assess the layout of what's coming up. Where are some barriers? How do we get around some barriers? That the issue of safety planning is not that I've identified a problem. Seeing a problem is fantastic. Being blind to that problem is horrible, because you're going to be a victim of falling into the trap of experiencing that problem. But if you can see that problem, you can potentially, and more so than not, be able to game plan on a safety plan on, how do I get around that barrier? How do I make that problem less likely or even not existent at that point in time? Remembering that conflict is normal and healthy. We need to see it. It's part of the process of relationships. It's part of the process of even internally when we're making change. Conflict is there. Whether we make changes on purpose or not, there's still a conflict there. And how do we deal with that? So really recognizing that that conflict is something we don't want to shy away from, and we actually want to be able to resolve it. Identifying SMART goals, once again, another very popular counseling type objective, where SMART is an acronym for, we're measuring or identifying specific goals. So through communication, what is that specific goal? How do we define it? The M for measuring. How do we know that we've actually attained that goal? So recognizing of when's the end point of it, and what would it look like for us to attain that goal. A for is it attainable? Is it is it something that I can actually attain? And R for being realistic. Is it something realistically possible? If a 16-year-old is looking to be an astronaut by 17, that's not realistic. It's just not going to happen. And then T, timeline. How do we administer a timeline if we have a particular goal? I think teenager years, I want to graduate in 4 years. Great. That's a timeline. I need to complete, each and every year on time without failing any classes or having to repeat any in order to accomplish that timeline. And then really focusing on strength-based mindset. How do we draw out the strengths? How do we draw out the talents of our children? How do we focus on what's going well? Because we as humans do a fantastic job at talking about negativities. We do a fantastic job at recognizing negativities. So really being able to understand the fact that there's a lot of good things going, even though there may be some situations that are just highlighted and very chaotic right now and quite frankly negative. But how do we use the strengths to overcome some of the weaknesses? How do we use our strengths and talents to be able to pull us out of a possible hole that we're in and not make the hole any larger? Small plug for the Colorado Crisis Service. If you don't have this number in your phone, I highly recommend that you have it. It's good anywhere in Colorado where you can call and talk to somebody if you're in crisis. I know that the focus of tonight and teenage years in general is hopefully we don't need to use these type of things, but it may not be our kid, it may not be ourself that needs this, but there might be somebody else we know that is in need of this and might not have it access. It's much more popular than anybody would believe out there that people are struggling. So to be able to be a support and be helpful in certain situations that somebody is in a moment of crisis, this allows them to be able to talk with somebody. If they need to see somebody in person, wherever they are in Colorado, by calling this number, they can get them in touch in their region on seeing somebody face to face to be able to talk a little bit more in depth on finding support and finding resolution to maybe the crisis that they're in. And then lastly, a few websites that I feel are pretty knowledgeable and beneficial to help parents out. For the top two ones being a little bit more medical based. By medical, it does not necessarily mean that you have to have a health degree in order to understand it, but it's a little bit more, can't think of the word, but a little bit more dry and such. The last one, Jefferson Center, obviously, if you're looking for support, and it might be time to have a professional facilitator to help families communicate some of these issues going on and help them learn some of these skills, finding a professional support. Then the last one is a little bit more of a journal style, like a magazine journal type style website, but a lot of great topics on there as far as how to talk to your child, what popular topics that teenagers go through, and being able to raise some of those type of conversations with them. And that is pretty much it.
Thank you very much, Jamie. I know people learn some very important things from listening to you. Thanks again for an excellent presentation. We now have time for some questions from the attendees. And the way you do that is to click on the Q&A box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen and then type in your question in the box at the bottom. So we've already got two questions, Jamie. Here's one. Says, do you have any advice on how to teach a child to be humble and elicit respect toward other people?
It's kind of a tough one. I mean, I think it's I'd be curious, one thing to be said on the humbleness that, are there maybe certain topics, are there certain things that they tend to gravitate towards? Is it somewhat of a um, more consistent topic that we tend to see them not humble in? Are there other areas that we can recognize that are different, or is it kind of across the board on just everything? They think that they're the most talented individual ever. I I'm not quite certain I necessarily have the greatest advice on that question. In all honesty, some of the things that I would expect is that depending on what topics that they're referring to is, um, how do we teach our kids on that? For the most part, anything that we're even experts in, we can still continue to learn. No matter who you meet in the world that's considered or labeled an expert, for me, if they're in a position or a mindset that they can't learn anything else, to me, it's pretty egotistical, and is depending on where it is, it's maybe even dangerous. I mean, think of a surgeon that just knows everything and it can't learn anything else. That means that they're prone to make mistakes. Trying to teach our children that no matter how much you can always learn something more. You can always fine tune. You can always become a master in certain topics of what it is, but it doesn't mean that you're going to know everything along those lines. The aspect of trying to teach a child on how to respect others. I almost feel like that's going to be a lot of education, a lot of ongoing discussion. It's probably also going to be a little bit more of a natural consequences. When they come into certain situations that they start disrespecting individuals, and they kind of get punished for it in some sort of manner, whether that is they disrespect their teacher or their principal, and now they're in detention. If they are if they disrespect a friend and now they're no longer their friend, being able to help that individual work through those moments of kind of going back to the stages of change. That person tends to be probably identified in a pre-contemplative state, so helping them recognize that there's things that they could probably do differently that would have saved that relationship or had not gotten them into detention. Being able to help them through those moments of recognizing those discrepancies in behavior versus what had occurred. Those are going to be hopefully, and hopefully some triggering moments in their own brain to identify, maybe I do play a piece in this. Maybe there's something I can do to make a change here.
Okay, Jamie, good response. Thank you. Here's a second question asking, are there local support groups for
here? So are there any local support groups for teens of color? Unfortunately, I am not super familiar with that answer. If they're, especially in this day and age with the quarantine and COVID going on, especially if people are meeting in person versus online. So if you were to call our agency, Jefferson Center, and speak to our navigation department, they may have some resources for you and ideas. So our navigation department at Jefferson Center is very resourceful for community type supports and things that are out there in the community, such as these type of things. So I would hopefully, I would hope that they have some resources there. I mean, they're usually even myself as a go-to for being able to, when a client or a family asks a question that I just don't know the answer to, I'm usually going to navigation department as well to be able to ask these type of questions. I see another question. Do you have tips for helping kids after contentious divorce when expectations differ between houses and parents can't effectively communicate? Um, it's a tough situation, and especially going back to the whole communication piece. We cannot force other individuals to abide by our expectations or play by the same rules. Unfortunately, that's just the nasty reality of humans. We can try our best. We can communicate, as best as we can, and we can be superb at the way we communicate. But at the end of the day, we are still at mercy of the other party playing nice and the other party finding a compromise of the same goal. Unfortunately, in situations like that, I think it's continuing to try to um, extend the possibility that you're working towards. So, really trying to um, not give up. Um, Sometimes if we are in a contentious relationship with an ex, um, you know, really living with the fact that usually we tend to have the same goal of making sure our children are growing up to learn what they need and to become successful. So really sitting on the fact that ideally we were probably starting out with the same goals. Our methods on how to get there are probably a little bit off. So continuing to try, um, learning how to cope with those types of difficult situations that we may not get that other individual on the same page. So we do need to learn how to cope with that type of stuff. We need to continue to have the conversations with our children and continue what we need to do in order to teach them what they or what we feel they need to know.